Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. As we look at what's happening in our country, especially heading into this election, one of the questions that I oftentimes come to, and I base a lot of my research on, a lot of the guests on, is who's really controlling things? We look at Kamala, we look at Trump, and we look at this system that we're living in that's been engineered in many ways. And the question is, okay, who's really controlling this? We hear these ideas and concepts about the shadow government, the deep state, etc. And so joining me today is my good friend Kent Heckenlively, who is a prolific author that just released a book detailing specifically, he co-authored with a former CIA officer, the depth of the CIA's influence on America, whether it's through the drug running, whether it's through Operation Mockingbird and control of the media, or just the international power they have to do regime changes and all kinds of things. And so this is going to be a little bit of a deep dive into the CIA, the history of the CIA, what they're currently doing now, why the CIA hates Trump, why the intelligence agencies hate Trump, and more. So folks, please enjoy the interview with author Kent Heckenlively. All right, listen up, folks. I've got a new sponsor at here.com/Seth. I'd love to have you check them out. If you've ever been frustrated with hearing loss, here.com is exactly where you need to go. These folks are the real deal. They've got an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, a 4.9 rating at Consumer Affairs, and over 500,000 people are already loving their super tiny, super powerful German hearing aids. Look how small this thing is. 500,000 people, folks, and the positive reviews just keep rolling in. So take Jerry, a podcast listener who wrote in saying the in-home exam made everything so convenient and his new devices are extremely comfortable compared to the old ones. Or James, who called working with here.com a total win and said it's one of the best investments he's ever made. You know what the best part is? With insurance, flexible financing options, and 100% money back guarantee, here.com makes getting great hearing aids super easy. Not to mention these things are tiny. No one's even going to see them on your ear. So if you're ready to stop saying, what? And start hearing the world clearly again, now is the time. So right now at here.com/Seth, you can sign up for an exclusive 45-day no-risk trial, and you'll get a free hearing aid consultation so you can hear the difference yourself. So folks, what are you waiting for? Head over to here.com/Seth. That's here.com/Seth. Mr. Kent Heckenlively, it is great to have you back on the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Seth.
So you are a prolific author, to say one thing, but I find that whenever I look through your books or see your new books, I find them to be very, very fascinating because you seem to be diving into the topics that I find most interesting, which I would describe as the bigger, the deeper, the far-reaching, where a lot of folks are focused on, I guess you could say, perhaps more of the surface phenomena or really focus on what's happening in DC. You're going into the heart of things, and I appreciate that because that's where I wish I could live is intellectually, is just looking at history and the alphabet agencies and going deep into what is the deep state, who is the deep state, why is our world like it is today, what are they hiding from us? And so it's always great to hear your perspective on things. And so you've got a new book that I saw that you'd put on Twitter, and I commented and said, oh my goodness, like this looks great. Yeah, there you go. It's a Twilight of the Shadow Government, How Transparency Will Kill the Deep State. In fact, if I have your permission, I think I'll call our show today Twilight of the Shadow Government because it's such a cool title, and I think it's going to really be attractive to folks. So
please do.
Walk us through this because this is a fascinating topic. I know that your co-author Kevin Shipp was former FBI, deeply entrenched in it was CIA. Yeah, he's a veteran CIA agent. Sorry, Kevin, for that. And so a lot of information in this is stuff that probably hasn't seen the light of day yet. So I'll just hand it to you to wherever you want to start with this.
Yeah, so I think for your listeners to know is that I'm probably best described as just an intensely curious person. And so I do want to go deeper into the story. And so, like a lot of people, I've heard stories about the CIA and I have certain opinions, but until you really research them, you just have to say, okay, I accept that to some extent I'm, probably poorly informed. And so that's why it's always such a thrill to me when my publisher calls me up with an exciting person like Kevin Shipp. And so Kevin, it was a former 17-year CIA officer. I learned that. They're officers, not agents. Their agents are the people they run in the foreign countries. So first of all, the nomenclature I got to get right. And he served with all four directorates of the agency. And in about 1999, 2000, he ran into trouble with the agency, which was he had identified a vulnerability, which was allowing bad foreign actors to figure out who our CIA agents were overseas and officers were overseas. Because usually the CIA officers are those who are hired by the CIA, who are Americans, and then they employ assets in the countries who they call agents. And so, he thought that identifying this vulnerability for the identity of our overseas assets would be welcomed by the CIA. It was not. He actually had to go outside the agency and actually get an inspector general, I believe, with the State Department, who had been a former CIA officer, to actually say, no, this is great. And Kevin actually received a commendation for that. But of course, once you make the big boys look bad, they decide to try and punish you. And so what happened next was Kevin was sent to a CIA domestic base, and his family and he were living in a house that was on top of a toxic waste dump of old ammunition. And he tells the story that one day his son comes up to him and says, Dad, look what I found. And he's holding up an old mustard gas shell, which had made its way to the surface. And so Kevin and his family suffered from chemical exposure. They spent 10 years trying to get damages and get the CIA to admit liability. And it was just the strangest thing because, it's always about personalities. And so, he's negotiating with the CIA saying, look, I was injured here. He had an outside attorney. And the CIA lawyer who was negotiating with him wanted to solve the thing. And they'd actually made an offer which was going to be accepted. And as Kevin tells the story, he believes it was two people at the CIA, George Tennant and this other guy named Buzzy Krongard, who was his third in command, who nixed the deal. And they threw it out. And they said, it's state secrets privilege. And, we're only going to offer you half of that money. And so that began, a 10-year process. Finally, he went public in 2011 in a series of articles in the New York Times, cataloging his story. So anybody who wants to search up Kevin Shipp, my co-author, can find articles written about him in the New York Times. So, when you're working with a former intelligence agent, it's always one of the criticisms is going to be like, oh, was he really in the agency? Oh, yeah, he was in the agency. And we've got lots of pictures and lots of documentation. So, that like most of the whistleblowers that I deal with, it's only when something happens to them and they understand the enormity of the corruption which must be going on all around them. When we live our own lives, we think our lives are the entire world. But, let yourself become at odds with the agency or with any group, and you'll find out what that group is really all about.
So the CIA, and this is, I'll kind of share a little bit of my own journey in understanding the CIA. So growing up, you look at the CIA and the FBI as the heroes, right? You see them as you have
Mhm.
all the Jason Bourne, all the different movies, and you glorify them. Our culture glorifies them, or it used to. But as I started learning more about how the world really works and how our government really works, you start to understand that, oh, it's almost like the CIA is this more private international spy network that carries out a lot of the nefarious deeds of the military industrial complex. And they work with hired mercenaries and ex special forces that come on as private contractors so they can do things that don't require congressional oversight. And it gets pretty deep. And then I remember when I first came across the book, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, who I ended up
Hmm.
having the opportunity to interview. And he talked about just the role that the CIA played in regime changes, and not just regime changes, in terms of like, hey, we're going to help them do a new election. We're talking about assassinating presidents that don't agree with the goals of the military industrial complex and the goals of the corporatocracy, whether it's big oil wanting access to oil as collateral in exchange for a big loan from USAID or whatever it is. And he specifically talked about the CIA jackals that come in and take care of those presidents. And in that book specifically, he mentioned two presidents he was very close with, the president of Ecuador and the president of Panama, which I believe, I think he pretty directly stated that those people were killed by these CIA jackals. For them, it was a small
Yeah.
aircraft explosion that
Yeah.
did it. So, what is your perception as you've learned more? And I know that you're a deep researcher and you have opportunity and access to people like Kevin Shipp who are on the inside. If you had to give your assessment of the role of the CIA globally that is not shown to the public and it's not portrayed, very often in the movies and in television, what would that be? How would you describe their activities?
Great question. I like to go deep, and I'm a guy who, while I will focus on personalities, what I'm really interested in is I'm interested in systems. Like, how do people think and what's their operating system? And so, one of the chapters that we go into is a deep dive into Alan Dulles. Okay, so he was head of the CIA. He was the fifth head of the CIA, but he served from, I believe, about 1953 to 1961 when he was fired by President Kennedy. But I wanted to understand, like, who was Alan Dulles and why is it important to understand Alan Dulles to understand the CIA? So here's a couple things about Alan Dulles. Before World War II, he was an attorney who was dealing with the rebuilding of Germany. Okay, I believe it was Sullivan and Cromwell that he worked with. His brother ended up as Eisenhower's Secretary of State. So just think about this. Between World War I and World War II, Alan Dulles is meeting with all these Germans, many of whom go on to high positions in Nazi Germany. And so the way Alan Dulles, I think, viewed the world is like, oh yeah, they're our enemy today, but they're really my good friends. And when all this unpleasantness is over, we're all going to be friends again. So Alan Dulles during World War II is originally supposed to serve in London, but he gets himself assigned to Switzerland, to the financial hub of Europe, which was unaligned during World War II. And it was a place where Nazis could go and Americans could go, right? So, against the orders of Franklin Roosevelt, Dulles starts trying to negotiate a separate peace with the Nazis. He's trying to get them to give a conditional surrender. This is against what Roosevelt wants. And in fact, he has meetings with representatives of the SS chief, Heinrich Himmler. And when Himmler is captured by Allied forces, he was actually on his way to meet with Alan Dulles. And so, besides Hitler's, there's no worse Nazi than Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, okay? So in charge of the death camps. And so to understand that even at the beginning, these guys like Dulles really didn't want to do what the leaders wanted them to do. So end of the war takes place, and then the CIA is created, And the original intelligence agency during World War II was the Office of Special Services, OSS, run by Wild Bill Donovan, right? So um, when it comes time to create this new agency, who does Truman put in charge but Allen Dulles? And so, even though Dulles is the number five director of the fifth director of the CIA, he's there from the beginning and he sets the whole thing up. And he does something that I learned is completely unique in the world of the intelligence agencies. Okay. So, pretty much every other intelligence agency in the world recognizes this problem that if you're going to have a secret agency, you need to separate two functions. You need to have one agency that gathers the intelligence. You need to have another one that, engages in action. Okay. These should be two different groups of people. These two groups of people should not know each other. Okay. In the CIA, those two were combined. And so if you want to take action and you're the CIA director, you say to yourself, like, oh, I just need to feed the president crappy information or biased information, which will make
Oh,
him
I see.
move in my direction. So I'm in control of the information that gets to the president, and then he'll have no choice but to do what I want him to do. And I think so. Understanding that we, the CIA, from its inception, had this structural problem that they could not that these two functions were combined. The problem with the CIA structurally is that they've got intelligence gathering and action combined in the same agency.
So is
You
it kind of
should
like
never
I'll
have.
throw in real quickly. Is it almost like within the police, for instance, you might have a SWAT team or a police officer, and you have a detective, right? And there's obviously the detectives need to be able to defend themselves, but the detectives aren't the ones getting into firefights and arresting people, and they're just responsible for gathering information. And then once it's cleared, then you have the police force or a SWAT team that might go in and act on that. And so, is that how it should operate, according to what you're saying?
That's a wonderful example.
Okay.
And so here's how I think the audience needs to understand when somebody like Trump comes in and he gets the intelligence agencies angry at him because, for example, he doesn't want to take briefings or he doesn't trust them. And they know that. And as I understand, Trump, employed some of his own private intelligence groups that he paid in order to get him information because he knows that the way the CIA is operating is they consider themselves above presidents, that Democratic or Republican, and what they're going to do is they're going to shade the intelligence to move the president in the direction that they want. And to understand that that has been part of the agency from the very beginning. And so, one of the things we also cover in the book is 1 month after President Kennedy was assassinated, December 22nd, 1963, Harry Truman, who founded the CIA, published an op ed in the Washington Post, which made this exact same point. And he later said that founding the CIA was the single biggest mistake he made. And so, understanding that when you have a system that is set up to have this outcome, it's all about systems. It's what you're allowed to do. And so the CIA is allowed to gather the intelligence, take action, and they're also allowed to lie to Congress. And they do it, and they don't get published, that they don't get punished for withholding information from Congress or outright lying to them.
I see.
Yeah, there you
Here's
go.
the
Limit
article he wrote.
CIA role to intelligence.
Yeah, 1963. So it's interesting that you mentioned Trump and how Trump like wouldn't even take their briefings. I wonder if he suspected that there was massive corruption, and they were, in a lot of ways, just telling him lies so they could carry on this, whatever criminal activity or whatever they were doing.
Yep, that's the whole game. When you
Mhm.
and so when you compliment me for going deep, here's what I like to do and why I think my books are so important. Because I show you the game and I bring receipts for the game. So one of the things that has interested me over the years, because I remember, watching the news in the 80s, and I remember when Gary Webb came out and he said that the CIA was selling crack cocaine in urban neighborhoods, and this led to an explosion of violence in the inner cities. And I was fascinated by that. And so one section of the book that we looked at was going into drug running in the CIA. And I wanted to get the information because, here I am, a kid in the 80s, and I'm reading this stuff, and I don't know what's true or not. But here I've got a veteran CIA agent, and I say, hey, I got this question. Is this true or bull or what? And so he leads me. So here I was, the kid in the 1980s, hearing these allegations that the CIA was involved in drug running, crack cocaine into the inner cities of America, specifically places like Los Angeles. So when the opportunity comes to write this book with Kevin Shipp, I want to get into this. I want to understand what happened with the CIA and drug running, and is there a history? Is there a pattern here? Well, lo and behold, I find abundant evidence that this is a long running practice of the CIA. Now, let me talk about how it came about. So, at the end of World War II in China, the nationalists were fighting the communists, the nationalists under Chiang Kai shek, the communists under Mao Zedong. And we had OSS agents in China, specifically one guy named Paul Hellawell. And what Hellawell observed is that the nationalists were selling opium to addicts in southern China as a way to make money to buy arms to fight the communists. And this became known as the Hellawell Plan. Okay, so all of this is documented in the history. So you can find books, you can find the Hellawell Plan. Okay, so then what is also happening is during World War II, the Office of Naval Intelligence initiated an alliance with the New York Mafia under Lucky Luciano to not only protect U.S. ports from Nazi saboteurs, but also giving them information that helped the US military with the invasion of Sicily, the invasion of Italy, and then the, the intelligence agencies reestablished the mob in Italy. Okay, so these guys had been working together for a long time. So, one of the problems with the CIA when it was founded was Truman signed the order for it to be put into existence, but he didn't give them a budget. Okay, so one of the ways that they raised money is that the newly formed CIA went to their buddies in the mob and said, hey, can you produce heroin in Sicily? And then what we'll do is we'll refine it at a pharmaceutical company in Italy, and then we'll ship it to the United States where it'll go to Harlem into the jazz clubs because who cares about those jazz musicians? So here I am saying, like, oh my God, this problem has been there from the very beginning. And time again, when I went into these deep dives and I found, like, okay, I understand what today's controversies are. Can I go back 70, 80 years and find people bringing up these very same problems? Absolutely. And I think that that's something that's good for people to understand, because when you look at the history, I mean, it's there. You can find other books, other sources, and all I'm saying is this is the structure by which the CIA had been set up. the way it was being run, and just extrapolate into today. And so we're in the book, we're going back and forth between what happened in the past and what is currently happening.
So that's okay. So that's a pretty crazy kind of revelation that basically the CIA learned the importance of drug running from China based upon what
Yeah,
was happening during the Civil War in China, right? Where you had the KMT and the
yeah.
communists. And so that's crazy though that was how they funded the agency. And so fast forward to today, how much, and I know it's probably a very difficult question to answer, but how much money or how much of their funding or resources are tied into the global drug trade? Because, you can imagine that why is it that oftentimes you say, oh, there's a corrupt police officer that was arrested, a corrupt politician, a corrupt judge, right? What I've found, and there's actually a book about called Political Ponerology, which is a book identifying evil and like the understanding that there are people that are evil and psychopathic, but actually those people tend towards positions where they can influence and gain power, such as CEOs of large companies, politicians, judges, police officers, etc. And so you oftentimes have people in those positions of power because they can, like a corrupt cop, they can hide the evidence, they can get away with so much more, let alone if you imagine an entire agency that is okay with the idea of killing people from drug overdoses and all the other things they're doing to fund this. I mean, it's insane to think about, but you can imagine if you're the CIA, you're above the law. So imagine if you could be, a drug dealer above the law with an international system where you could, you have control of airports and all kinds of things. So back to the question though, how large do you think or do you estimate this drug running operation is today? And then the second part of the question is, what does it look like today?
Well, here's the question I always ask, because I'm like a scientist who's looking for the black hole. Okay. The thing that doesn't make sense. So scientists can't observe a black hole. They simply observe a place where light doesn't seem to be going. Okay. Or that there's no light emanating from it. So I can go back into the past and I can look at this history of drug running. And so you draw a straight line from heroin in Harlem in the late 1940s. You can look at the allegations of the Golden Triangle in Vietnam. You can look at the 1980s and crack cocaine coming into the inner cities. And you say, like, okay, I'm seeing this pattern. Well, what's the black hole in the American media today? The black hole is, why is nobody seeming to aggressively go after the cartels that are bringing drugs, human people, and fentanyl into our country? I mean, what is it? 90 to 100,000 people a year are dying from fentanyl overdoses. So I can't tell you that the CIA is involved with the cartels for in some way to influence governments south of our border. And in return, they're allowing fentanyl and human traffickers to come across the border. What I'm observing is to my mind, there's no other reasonable explanation other than some deal has been struck, because I don't hear people talking about 90 to 100,000 Americans a year dying from drug overdoses. So, so I'm very clear on what I can prove and what I can't prove. So I give you all the evidence of what's happened in the past. I walk you up to the precipice of what's happening today, and I'm asking the question, why is it a very rare politician who says something like, maybe we should send the military after the cartels? I mean, do we really not know where their operations are? We must.
Folks, we all see it. Everything's getting more expensive. We're paying 2, 3, 4 times what things cost just a few years ago. And we know they're lying. 3% inflation, really? Think about it. Why are they telling us to keep our hard earned money in the banks and stock market while they're rushing to buy gold and silver? That's right. Governments and central banks around the world are dumping the dollar and scrambling to buy gold and silver right now. These are smart people. They see the signs just like you do. They know the crash is coming. The dollar has lost more than half its value in the last 5 years, and our national debt's increasing $1 trillion every 100 days. It can't go on like this. Even Bank of America's warning about a dollar collapse. And if they're right, it's only a matter of time before our savings, our IRAs, and our 401ks could be wiped out. Look, right now, it's still easy to buy gold and silver, but in the future, it may not be. Experts are saying that prices will keep surging, and UBS says that gold could even go up to $5,000 an ounce. Noble Gold's phones have been ringing off the hook because the folks who get it aren't wasting time. Now, I can't tell you what to do with your hard-earned money, but I can tell you that even if just some of your savings are in gold and silver, you can rest assured that money is safe. So call Noble Gold and protect your wealth today. It's better to be 6 months early than 1 day late. So call Noble Gold today at 626-654-1906 or visit goldwithseth.com and set up your free wealth consultation. The phone number and the websites are also in the show's description. Yeah, I mean, of course, with our satellites and who knows what kinds of technology that they have. So, gosh, it's
Yeah.
just crazy to think because as I'm reflecting on this, I'm looking at your book, the shadow government, right, discussing that, and what I see is obviously it's some form of shadow government, right? They're doing regime changes, and this has become much more common knowledge, right? That they're doing color revolutions in other countries and whatnot. But what I'm also looking at here is the role as social engineers, because ultimately a government is in a lot of ways beholden to the people, especially in a constitutional republic. That's how it's supposed to be. But if the people in the country, if they're doped up on drugs, if they are lied to through the media, which I want to get into the media next.
Yeah.
These are ways. Even looking at how they've created this race war in America, and why is it that blacks are filling our prisons? Why is it that drugs are so prolific? And they want people that to have this divide of left versus right, black versus white. They want the white people to say, "Oh, it's the lazy black people." They want the black people to say, "Oh, it's the oppressive white people." But maybe a lot of it is just that our agencies and the CIA has been intentionally injecting highly addictive and highly deadly drugs, and that have a very high um, penalty if you get caught with them, right? Let alone marijuana. People are in prison for marijuana. If someone gets caught with a pound of heroin, I mean, that's a pretty serious sentence. And so you can see that
Yeah.
there's massive social engineering with drugs and how they've done that. But then we step into the media, which I was reflecting on this earlier today as I was thinking about just the state of our country heading into the election and the divide and everything. It's like, gosh, I feel like probably almost 95% of it is just the media, just the lies of the media, and
Well,
obviously,
yeah.
the politicians, but
And I love that you're bringing that up because that's a big topic of our book. Because again, what I can do is I can go into the past and I can give you good, reliable information about what happened. It's been vetted. It's part of the accepted history. And then we go into the present and we present these problems and we suggest that maybe that's what's happening. So let's talk about the press. So from its very inception, the the CIA understood that they needed to control the free flow of information to us. And so what did they do? Well, they created this thing called Project Mockingbird, which was revealed in the mid 1970s by the Church Committee, in which at least 400 major journalists were on the payroll of the CIA. And one of the things to realize is that those were journalists who were actually on the payroll. What they had also done was they had an active recruitment measure. So one of the things that is fascinating to me because when I was young, I just worshipped at the altar of William F. Buckley Jr. Okay. National Review. He was my guy. I just loved him. So sophisticated and everything. So imagine my surprise when I'm putting this book together and I find out that Buckley had been hired by the CIA out of Yale. Okay. And it's in all the histories and everything. And so, of course, he downplays his role, but it's like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And you find out that these titans of the media were on the payroll of the CIA, like Philip Graham, who would later go on to own the Washington Post. His wife, after his death, Catherine Graham, would own the Washington Post. Your audience may not know this, but if you go to the CIA, there is the Catherine Graham Auditorium. Okay. So, you find these things. And, one of the things is, I'm like a dogged detective. So I get on a scent and I stay on it. So the fact that I worshiped William F. Buckley as a kid and I find out that he was a CIA agent pissed me off to no end. And I said, let me investigate this. And so I came up with another interesting fact that everybody agrees to. It's cited. So during the Watergate, controversy, the Watergate scandal, it came out that William F. Buckley was the godfather to E. Howard Hunt's children. E. Howard Hunt was the ringleader of the Watergate break-in. And so E. Howard Hunt had been Buckley's handler. And to make it even crazier, because we go into Watergate and we open the book like going after Bob Woodward, who also seems to be an intelligence asset, in our opinion. And when you look at his history makes no freaking sense. But during the Watergate scandal, E. Howard Hunt is trying to pay off the burglars to stay quiet. Who is he using as his courier to get money to the Watergate burglars? He's using his wife. Okay. What happens to his wife? His wife dies in a plane crash, which the plane, a commercial jetliner going into Midway Airport in Chicago, blows up. And now William F. Buckley is, godfather to E. Howard Hunt's children. And I'm just saying to myself, how many ways do they have us? Another guy who was one of this original group was a guy named Richard Mellon Schiaffi. Now, that name may or may not be familiar to people, but he was the guy in the 90s who is funding all the anti-Clinton stuff. And so you find yourself going like, what is going on here? Why do all these people seem to have intelligence connections? And, it's said that if you just know the story, you don't know anything. You got to know the players. Okay. So here's what this book does for you. This book tells you the players. I show you how the manipulation is done. And then we talk about stories that are in the news, and we encourage you to think, hey, maybe the story you're hearing in the news, take whatever you want to do. The Covington kids, Russiagate. I mean, the whole Russiagate thing is an abomination to American democracy, because you find things that the intelligence agencies first use Carter Page to go after President Trump without telling the court that Carter Page was actually a CIA asset and input. So here's Carter Page, poor Carter Page. What a nice guy. he's told that the Russians are trying to influence him. So what does Carter Page do? I think it's like 2012, 2013. Carter Page says, "Sure, I'll talk to you intelligence guys. Yeah, sure. I'll let you know everything that's going on." And so poor Carter Page doing his duty as what he thinks is a patriotic American by talking to our intelligence agencies about possible Russian involvement, a couple years later finds himself accused of being a Russian agent. So that's the kind of games they're playing. And once you see it, and that's hopefully what our book does, you can't unsee it.
Well, one other person I'll bring up is Anderson Cooper, right? This is a paper. This is
Yeah.
published, on a scholar website. It's a PDF, kind of analysis. Anderson Cooper, CIA operative, and it says here, it says following his sophomore year and junior years at Yale, there you go, Yale, a well-known recruiting ground for the CIA. Cooper spent his summers interning at the agency's monolithic headquarters in Langley, Virginia, in a program for students interested in intelligence work. His involvement with the agency ended there, and he chose not to pursue a job with the agency after graduation, according to a CNN spokeswoman who confirmed the details of Cooper's CIA involvement to Radar. So, of course, it's like, oh, well, okay. So, thank goodness, CNN has debunked this article that their star journalist doesn't have CIA connections. And also, the interesting thing is that I'm sure you run into this. You start running into these families and these bloodlines, and it's like, oh, Anderson Cooper is also, that's not his real name. He's a Vanderbilt. It's like, oh, he actually comes from one of America's most powerful families, and oh, he went to
Yeah.
Yale and he interned at the CIA. Now he's one of their all-star news anchors. It just there's too many coincidences. And
Well,
the other thing about go ahead.
one of the interesting things that we delve into is how even from the beginning, so Office of Strategic Services in World War II needs to be looked at as the forerunner of the CIA, because a lot of the guys who are in OSS end up as founding members of CIA. Well, OSS was composed mostly of Ivy Leaguers, bankers, lawyers. That's the way it got set up. CIA was the same sort of thing. And so, one of the things that's really interesting, and this is where, I think you just have to be a dogged detective. And that's what I am. So I actually go to the original sources. So, like, for example, what's hilarious to me is I have this belief that human beings need to tell the truth, okay, in some way. So you can go do a deep dive into the bad guys, and if you're doing your homework, you're going to find out that they convict themselves. Here's a perfect example. Alan Dulles in 1963 publishes a book about intelligence work. And so, I get the book and I start reading through it. And he talks about, gee, there needs to be a way that we interact with the newspapers and the media, and maybe that First Amendment is kind of an impediment to our work. And I'm thinking, like, oh my God, John Kerry just recently said something which is straight out of Alan Dulles's mouth. So when you get the program, when you understand how they have to influence us, under, because we're supposed to live in a democracy. So they got to convince us we live in a democracy. So their ways are going to be different than a typical dictatorship, but they're trying to influence us. And so you know, I always say that I think we're living in an Eastern European 1988 moment where the truth is being revealed. And so what's happening now in story after story that you read is people don't trust the institutions, okay? And when people don't trust the institutions, you can have a relatively nonviolent revolution. I think we are at the precipice of a nonviolent revolution, not where we're going to be shooting at each other, but where the system collapses based on its absurdity, and its absurdity that is clear to everybody. So I'm really I mean, look at who they put up. The Democrats put up for president. The worst politician in America. I mean, who could not, who with a barely functioning brain couldn't do a Joe Rogan interview? You know, I mean, he is so friendly, he's so polite. He starts his show complimenting, people on something, their health, their looks, their body of work. You know, he- you know, 90% of Americans 98% of Americans could go on Joe Rogan and he would find something interesting about him. The only person in America who couldn't do Joe Rogan is running for president on the Democratic ticket.
It's absurd. It's absolutely insane. And you make a good point with that.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted
So,
to add
so
in.
I say we have to be good-hearted. We have to poke fun because it's our laughter which is going to bring down the system.
I certainly agree with that. I really do. One thing I was going to throw in there, just as we're kind of going into these connections, and Yale, right? As this article kind of points out, that Yale's a very common recruiting ground for the CIA. One of the most famous Yale, I'm not sure if he's a graduate or someone that was involved in Yale and studied at Yale, was Mao Zedong, which a lot of people don't understand that. So
Hmm.
actually, Mao Zedong was part of Yale in China, which was a group. It was a program of bringing Yale to China. So Mao Zedong was part of the Yale in China program, and in fact, they helped him print a lot of his earlier flyers. They gave him buildings to use for his earlier rallies, and so you think it's like, oh, this is a much deeper web than we could possibly imagine. But I like your conclusion that we've arrived at with this, and it's something that I agree completely as well. Is that these institutions, these governments, these corporate, these giant corporations, and really, Satan himself. Let's just say it for what it is. Satan himself only wins if he can keep the population in a state of deception, because I really believe that all of us are made in God's image, and that we have a
Yeah.
conscience, that we have a soul, and that if you show someone right and wrong, there's deep, deep, deep inside of them, even if it's buried, they know right and wrong. And what makes
Yeah.
us commit a lot of wrong is the deception that convinces the world that wrong is right. Right? These are very Orwellian times. That it's a good thing.
Satan is
It's a
the ultimate
virtuous
deceiver.
thing to mutilate children's genitals. It's like, how are we living in this world where we have people fighting for that, or that we have the main issue of the Democratic Party that is driving is, we want to give you the right to kill your own baby if you want to, right? It's absurd. If you went back a couple hundred years, like right now, my wife and I were watching War and Peace, and I'm seeing the culture and the beauty of Russia, pre-Bolshevism and pre Soviet Union. I'm thinking, gosh, imagine if you went back in time to that era in the early 1800s and you told these people, hey, you know what? In a couple hundred years, the most important thing to a large part of the voting class in America is the women wanting the ability to kill their own babies. People would look at that and think, that's absolutely insane, but that is the power of the media. It's the power of big tech. It's the power of the CIA. It's the power of the social engineers, is they can convince the population that evil is good and good is evil. But that's only for as long as they can control the narrative. And we're seeing that break. And in part by folks like yourself. They're writing books breaking the narrative. So let me go and I'll pull up just the Amazon link for that. This is the book, folks, Twilight of the Shadow Government, How Transparency Will Kill the Deep State. Actually, there it is, How Transparency Will Kill the Deep State. That's it. We have to expose, we have to shine light on this. And also, if folks want to check out your website as well, it's kentheckenlivelybooks.com. That's so they can look at, read about you, they can contact you, etc. Also, I recommend folks follow you on Twitter as well. So, Kent, do you have any final closing thoughts as we wrap up?
No, just be of good cheer. I don't know what's going to happen the next couple of weeks, but I think the system is breaking down. So I can't tell you when it's going to break down, but it will break down.
That's a good point, because as we're heading into these, really, the election, and then the months after that until we get to the inauguration, regardless of what happens, that's a really good point that the system is on its last leg. So even if they're able to pull off, installing Kamala and everything, again, maybe it lasts 6 months before the whole thing falls apart, which, I can't say I'm looking forward to the whole thing falling apart, but I'd rather live in a system that's collapsing, that's the evil collapsing, and maybe there's a difficulty around that, and us, the good people rising through that, than living in a system where the evil has this. Maybe things are more peaceful and more stable, but you're absolutely controlled by these evil systems. I'd rather be in the former.
Yep. All right, Seth. Thank you so much.
Of course, Kent.
Really
Thank you very
appreciate you.
much. And just encourage it. I'm gonna bring up the Amazon link one more time, folks. This is one way we fight, is by supporting authors like Kent, who is writing books. I imagine that CNN did not offer you an interview to talk about your new book, right?
They did not.
Yeah, but I certainly did. So, we are the
You did.
media now. That's what's happening. We are the media now. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Kent. Take care
All
and
right.
God bless. It's always nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Folks, we are officially in the time of the year where eating becomes off balanced, way off balanced. Parties, holidays, family gatherings always mean more snacks, more sweets, and generally indulging in all the wrong foods. And when your eating habits get off balance, so can you. That's why I strongly recommend Balance of Nature's daily supplements. Their fruit and veggie supplements are sourced from whole fruit and vegetable ingredients, all the things you might be missing, and all the things you need to make up for being off balance during this eating season. Make sure you're getting more of a variety of fruit and vegetable ingredients at every step of the way with Balance of Nature. Start a trend toward better health today with my special startup offer. Whether you order online or call them direct, you must use the promo code SETH, that's SETH, to get 35% off plus free shipping and their money back guarantee. So, folks, call them today at 800-2468-751 and use discount code SETH to get your discount, or order online at balanceofnature.com. And again, use discount code SETH to get 35% off.